go to line, it just works all day long. Right. They're gonna look at it again next year. Bear out of it. Train to still in. Are you joking? Read my family. Okay.
You know, yeah.
Coach and all this.
Yeah, so her husband.
Phil. Yeah. No,
It was really cool going down.
Those all buddies.
Will the questions pop up anonymously or will my name
Yeah,
be
yeah.
beside?
Just so everyone knows, we're going to do a presentation shortly after 6. So for those that are online, just to let you know, we'll get a few more minutes here for some last minute stragglers to come on in, and then we'll start with the presentation. For those in person, we got some cookies and water at the back, so please go and grab them so we don't have to bring them back with us. That would be much appreciated.
Especially for the
They were there.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, cool.
So, you know, I'd already. 14-year-old girl. You know, fast forward to,
I guess.
fast forward to. Look at that much different. You know, it takes a lot of totally.
I'm good. Like, what do you drive see?
And his wife bought introduced me to the family, otherwise.
Oh, nice.
It's
There's two more. Two more. Yeah, we got to get better and everything. So it counts. No area. Yeah, so much of it is very small.
a lot of it. No, he was originally from West. Lived in farm out for a long time.
Oh, the like
Yeah, that way.
Yeah,
He said, you know, that's big house.
he's like the local guru.
You know, that's one of the, like, they gave both.
They gave who? Okay.
They gave.
Right,
And then so like, you know, member.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
And they'll be active doing that.
It's really cool. I don't know.
What did you used to be called? Got a 14 foot one.
You
Want to drag it up there?
But they loan.
Big sky that. Yeah.
Got that.
Yeah.
You like. Oh, they will fix that. So that would be on 8 hours.
They don't want
that.
Yeah. That friend is good at it. Like good. Why did I take the That's not really.
No, it's not where I went. No, we were quite a ways out. 9 minutes.
So around.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you
That
go.
would be the goal. Right. Get her. White.
well, you're healing.
I'm okay.
A lot of rehab last few days.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah, I look at my son.
Nice.
I hang out with Jade all the time. I'll go with Paul. One in the car.
I am the opposite.
So you got your own report. Instagram. I'm like, oh man, they're all. I had a good laugh. Thank you very much. I just,
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Think that we're going to get going. We were a little nervous with the turnout at first because there was only one person that came in, and that was our boss who's sitting in the back there, Mr. Steve Black. So we were all a little bit nervous. We were like, oh, it was a lot of work, especially for Jay over there to get everything set up. But no, thank you very much for everyone coming in. And we promised you we would get going shortly after 6 o'clock. So we want to keep our promise. And for everyone that attended in person, we thank you very much. Anyone that's attending online, we thank you very much as well. Please share this with everyone. We are recording it, so it will be available. We're going to post it on the Talk Revelstoke page after, and it will stay on the city's YouTube page. So again, if you're very interested in the meeting and you want to listen to it twice or even 3 times, it will be there for you. So do not worry. Before we get going tonight, we do want to start with a land acknowledgement. So we do acknowledge and honor the 4 nations whose traditional land we do gather today. That is the Siniat, the Ktunaxa, the Secwepemc, and the Syilx. Very important that we continue to foster and build our relationship with our Indigenous partners as we do move forward with different city planning projects, as well as economic development activities and environmental conservation. So the reason why everyone is either tuning in tonight or here in person, again, thank you very much for showing up. It is not a good feeling when the chairs don't fill. So thank you. We are going to be starting down this long path of a comprehensive rewrite of our zoning bylaw. I'm sure some of you have probably heard the city talk about this in the past, and it hasn't been successful in the past. We do not have a new zoning bylaw. We have kind of a modified version of our old one that's from 1984. We will get into that later. So this is a big project, and we are very excited to get it going. So a brief overview today. I'm going to go over a little bit of background, give you a bit of a roadmap on what this project is, what it means, and how we're actually going to be engaging the public in it, because zoning bylaws do get, I don't want to say dry, but they do get a little bit dry and they do get quite technical. So we want to make sure that the community understands what changes are proposed, what it means for them, what it means for their neighborhood, and what it means for the community overall. We're going to talk about some of the key issues that will hopefully lead into a nice Q&A, get you guys thinking a little bit to ask us some really tough questions. That's why we have our whole project team here. So without further ado, I will introduce you to the project team. So this project is being done predominantly in-house with city staff, and we do have the guidance of, his name is Mr. Kevin Brooks. Can't see him online, but he is listening. He lives out on the island, so we did not fly him out here. You're welcome. We did not spend taxpayer money on that, but yes, Kevin is online. Kevin has decades of experience working as a planner, and he works across municipalities in British Columbia, doing a lot of work on things like zoning bylaws, and he knows this stuff inside and out. So Kevin's going to be helping guide us through this process, but a lot of the on the ground work will be done in-house. To my left, I have our new planner 1, Adrienne Comars. I say that because she was recently promoted to planner 1. So congratulations. And then we have Erica Hartling, who is our planner 2. So we do have our team. And as I already mentioned, we have our director sitting in the back there, Mr. Steve Black. So a few things noticed in my time in Revy the last few years, community really likes to come out and get engaged. And sometimes there's some finger pointing. So we think it's really important that we start off with some rules of engagement. And that's not going to happen with anyone in here. There might be some pointed questions online. I know my partner's listening online, so she might throw some doozies out there to try and make us look bad, but we'll see. So just for everyone, be respectful of everyone in here. Everyone's taking the time to come out. They want to learn, they want to understand, they want to ask some good questions. So pretty basic, be respectful of everyone. Focus on the future, not the past. The past is really helpful to help inform where we're going to go as the future. But the point of today is not to come out, ask about what decision was made in the past, how that decision could be made. We want to move forward. We want to learn from the past and move forward. Be mindful of time so everyone can participate. This rule is mostly for me because I like to talk. Stay on task. We're here to talk zoning bylaw. We don't want to be talking about the potholes that you have on 4th Street. You can talk to Mr. Black after the meeting about that. And then be open-minded to listen to others' perspectives and to learn from everyone. We all have lots to learn from each other, and that's why we want the community to come out, give us some feedback so that we can learn from you guys who know the community inside and out. So first things first, and this is kind of the boring dry stuff, so we'll whip through it pretty quickly, but what is a zoning bylaw? So zoning bylaws are established under the provincial legislation that we call the Local Government Act. That is the legislation that all municipalities across British Columbia have to abide by. So we do get painted into a little bit of a box. So important to keep that in the back of your head. We do have this legislative framework that we need to operate within. It's not a free for all where the city gets to do whatever they want. We do have these boxes that we do work within. But in general, you have a zoning bylaw. It's going to tell you how you can use land, how you can use buildings and structures on your land, the density of buildings on your land, the siting, size, dimensions of buildings. So things like setbacks, maximum building height. It's going to have important parameters in there for those types of development regulations. It's going to tell you the location of different uses on your land. You can use it, and this is interesting that we will delve into later on in this project. You can limit the form of residential tenure through a zoning bylaw in British Columbia. So you can say under this zoning, only rental buildings are permitted. So that's a really interesting tool that we don't have right now that we do want to explore with this project. And then lastly, you regulate the shape, size, dimension of lots, which essentially is anyone here has ever tried to subdivide their lot, chop it up into more lots. That is all based on your zoning regulations, how big those lots need to be, how wide they need to be in order to allow for subdivision. So what's in our current zoning bylaw? So the current zoning bylaw has essentially the purpose of the bylaw, the enabling legislation, basic provisions, all those legalese that are kind of boring that no one really reads through, but are very important. It has supplementary regulations which apply to all development. So you can think right now in our zoning bylaw, an example of this is accessory dwelling unit regulations, garden suites, carriage suites. These apply throughout the city. So instead of having them in specific zones in the bylaw, you have them as supplementary or general provisions, and they apply throughout the city. You have your standard zones, which tell you what your permitted uses are, the density, as well as the applicable regulations specific to that zone. So I'm sure everyone's probably heard of the R1 zone, which is our single family zone, single detached residential zone. That'll tell you within this zone, you can have a single family house, you can have one carriage suite, and you must meet a 6-meter front yard setback and a 10-meter building height, for example. You have your parking and loading regulations. Right now, if anyone's familiar with our bylaw, our parking and loading regulations are quite outdated. And as we do shift to different transportation modes, our master transportation plan was recently approved. We want to have a bylaw that reflects where we're going as a community. Administration and enforcement of the bylaw. And then lastly, definitions. And those definitions are very important. They help with interpretation of the bylaw to make sure everyone's reading it the same way. So as you guys are following this process, keep that in the back of your heads as well. Those definitions are very important. Now, we just redid our official community plan, and a lot of people might be asking, what's the difference between your official community plan and your zoning bylaw? The official community plan is that high-level vision document that sets the stage, generally speaking, where we want to see different types of uses and how much of that use we want to see. It's your ideal future land use. And so the OCP assigns a land use designation to every single property in the city. And as planners, that's the first thing we look at when one of the members of the public comes in and says, I want to rezone my property. We say, okay, well, what does the OCP say about what type of development should be allowed on your property? The zoning bylaw is more specific on the ground nitty gritty rules that I previously mentioned. Building height, setbacks, no more than 30 units are allowed on your property of X amount size. So it's really those on the ground rules where the OCP is the high level vision. An example, an OCP might say this property is suitable for low density residential without saying necessarily what that ultimately looks like. And then a low density residential zone could say we have row houses that are X amount in width that are allowed under low density residential land use designations. So up on the maps here, you can see not anything too interesting, but the one on the left is the OCP land use designation map. The one on the right is the zoning bylaw map. The real point here is to show that, you know, the OCP might have a little bit more of a coordinated land use map where the zoning is a bit more sporadic. And one of the key things that we're going to have to look at when we redo the zoning map in the city is alignment with this OCP land use designation map. So something to keep in mind. And right off the bat, if you guys see with this bylaw that we're doing some OCP amendments, it's nothing to get super worried about. All we're trying to do is just align these two maps together in the end. That's really all we're looking for. So some of you might be asking, wasn't the bylaw recently updated? Yes. So in January 2022, we did do an update to the zoning bylaw. What we considered that to be was phase one of this comprehensive rewrite project. This really helped get us some of that low hanging fruit that has been missing in the city for a century now. So things like accessory dwelling units, garden suites, carriage suites, we ultimately allowed for those with the bylaw update. So for those of you that don't know, you can do one. Build your garden and carriage suites. We have seen a few of them creep up throughout the community and they look excellent. So come in and build them. Allowed for secondary suites and things like duplexes and row houses. So again, trying to support more of that missing middle housing that we're seeing a need for. We expanded our density bonusing provisions and we can get into that later. I'm sure some of you might have some questions about that. And we also had greater allowances for food production as well as crop production in the city. And lastly, we looked at some of the parking regulations, and in areas where you're in proximity to amenities and it's walkable, we reduce some of the parking requirements. So we're going to be building on that with this zoning bylaw update. This graphic, I'm not sure how much you guys can read it, but it's in the handout that I hope everyone grabbed. The point of this is to show you that usually these bylaws, they should be updated every 5 years or so comprehensively. You know, you track them, you do housekeeping amendments every year, little tweaks and changes, but every 5, 6, 7 years, you really should be delving into it to do a big review. So you can see we have had, you know, I think, what do we have on there? 8 different bylaws that have come through the city over time since 1959. They all stay in place 5, 6, 7, 3 years, 4 years until we get to 1984. Then we had a bylaw that was in place for a grand total of 38 years. So that's clearly an issue. And the current bylaw that we have that was updated in 2022, it is a much better version of that 1984 bylaw, but we still have a lot more work to do on it and we still have to keep pushing it. So that gives you an idea. We're really dealing with a bylaw now that's had some, you know, lipstick on a pig, for lack of a better term, but it's nearly 4 decades old. We have to do a comprehensive rewrite of it. It's definitely time. So that brings us to how are we actually going to tackle this? It is a big project. There's a lot to consider in it. So we're going to have to review all the existing zones, including updates, consolidation, drafting of new zones where needed. Some of you probably wonder, we have things called comprehensive development zones, which are site-specific zones. You know, Mackenzie Village is an example of one. We have a bunch of them scattered throughout the city, way more than we need for a city of this size. But it's because our standard zones that we have contained in the bylaw right now are not sufficient to address the development needs of the community. We don't have a zone, for instance, that allows for townhomes with a detached carriage suite if you have access to a laneway. So the hope is that we start incentivizing some more innovative forms of residential development by having these standard zones in the bylaw for the development community to choose from. And not only is it easier for them to get through the process, then it gives council a better idea of what they're actually approving and the community a better idea of what they can expect to be built when we have zones that more clearly describe the type of development that is permitted within it. We're going to be looking at all the uses in the bylaw. So for those in the business community, very important. We want to make it easier to allow for the types of businesses that we envision coming to Revelstoke, well, right now and into the future. So we have to look at all the uses as they currently sit in the bylaw and figure out in what commercial and industrial zones and mixed use zones should those uses be allowed in. And from staff side, we really want to allow some flexibility so that Revelstoke can continue to have a diverse, robust local economy and people aren't needing to go through a rezoning process or a text bylaw amendment process to ultimately allow for their business. We're going to look at all the definitions for clarity, consistency, inconsistencies. If anyone's tried to go through a building permit process before, you might be like, wow, your bylaw calculates height in a really wonky way. So we're going to be looking at making sure that it's very clear and understandable for anyone who's reading it, how you can comply with the bylaw. We're going to update our supplementary regulations that I discussed previously, things like accessory dwelling unit regulations, vision clearance regulations, all that super, super exciting stuff that everyone's really keen to talk about today, I'm sure. And then parking and loading regulations. And these are always a sticking point. And one thing I will tell the community for who's listening right now, we do have to look at reducing our parking requirements. This is a trend across North America right now. We are moving towards more public transportation, active transportation, And in 20 years, we will not need the sea of parking lots that we are building right now. So we need to start thinking with new development, how do we incentivize those types of alternative modes of transportation and start disincentivizing people always moving around by cars? It doesn't mean you slash everything and it's a free for all, but it means we need to be very methodical in how we think about this and not just thinking about today, but thinking 20, 30 years down the road, these parking lots are still going to be here and we don't want to have a sea of empty parking lots within the city. And it's important to note too, that all of this is going to be guided by the official community plan and the housing action plan. Those were both adopted last summer by the previous council, and they will serve as the guiding documents for this project. So I won't go through this, but this just tells you the general phases. So you can see project started February, March. That's when we're doing some background work in-house. And we are looking at, probably draft release of a bylaw sometime April 2024. Initial council consideration sometime between June and September. Again, this is a tentative target right now, and we've built a lot of time in here to allow for sufficient engagement with the community, because it's really important because these bylaws are technical. We want everyone to have a firm understanding of what this change means for them and their property, their neighborhood, as well as the community more generally. So that when council's considering this at a public hearing sometime in 2024, the community is very well informed and understands what these changes mean. So public engagement. So we did do a lot of engagement for the official community plan and housing action plan. We are going to be utilizing the APC as kind of a technical advisory committee for this to advise throughout the project. So APC will be heavily involved. We're going to be using community mailouts, community newsletter. Those of you who haven't signed up on it yet, please sign up for it. We're going to be doing advertisements, Q&A, Talk Revelstoke. Talk Revelstoke has a few engagement functions on there. We're going to be doing that throughout the project. So please participate through Talk Revelstoke as well. And that's the stuff that will be happening throughout the project. When we hit key milestones, we're going to be doing public engagement through open houses. And we're going to try something that I'm not too sure if Revelstoke has done it in the past that are called coffee chats. I know it seems pretty basic, but we'll get into that right now because we do think that it's an important engagement tool for the community to really come out and more intimately understand what these changes mean. So there is a survey available on until May 15th on Talk Revelstoke. So please go and complete it. It won't take more than 5 minutes of your time, 3 minutes if you're really fast. And then between May and September, we're doing some targeted engagement. So the building and development community who use these bylaws day in, day out. What are the challenges? Where are we seeing a lot of variances where they're not really needed? The chamber, what type of businesses do we think are going to be coming to the community over the next coming years? And then once we're done that, staff are going to get to work on drafting the new zones, as well as assigning those new zones to every single property in the city on a new zoning map. Now, that is where, in staff's view, the community is going to be really interested and they really want to sink their teeth into that and understand, okay, wait, my neighbor's zoning was this and now it's changing to this. What does that mean for me? So that is where this idea of coffee chats and the way we're envisioning it right now is on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis or clustered neighborhood basis. The community will be able to sign up for these coffee chats, come in and have a discussion with one of our lovely staff and really delve into what these changes actually mean for them. And if we do this right, then you're going to see community members coming out from the same neighborhood where they're also learning from each other and learning what the needs of the community are. So someone might come out and say, I don't want to see a duplex on my lot ever. But then they might hear from their neighbor who lives down the road and say, oh, wait, I would love to have a duplex with a couple suites on my lot. So it really allows the community to better understand what they want on kind of a neighborhood by neighborhood basis. So we're hoping that will be a really great way for the community to get informed on what the changes are, what it means for them, their neighborhood, and the community overall. So that's going to take a lot of time. And then that will bring us into 2024. We're hoping that between January and April, we're able to cobble together the last remnants of the bylaw and package it as a full draft bylaw, take the feedback through these coffee chats and ultimately embed it into the finalized version of the draft bylaw. And then April, May is when we're targeting the release of that bylaw. We'll be doing open houses, more coffee chats for anyone that's interested and wants to come spend more time with us. Please come spend more time with us. We like it when people come to development services. It's a fun group there if you guys haven't been. So please come. See Nathan back there. He knows it's a fun group. He comes all the time. He loves it. That's why he's smiling. And then June to September, this is where we hand it over to council. And council, there's a couple of them in the room today. It's all on them after that. Staff have gotten it to that point. Then it's up to council. Go through the public hearing process. Listen to what the community has to say. And if staff do their job right, and if the community participates appropriately, which we hope everyone does continue to participate. I know it can be dry, but please come out. It is important. Then the community is going to be really well informed and will provide council very good feedback at that public hearing process if something isn't right in the bylaw. So really, really important, that public engagement process from start to finish. So this is where we're going to talk about some of the key issues we'll look at. And we only got 4 of them on here, and I'm sure some of you who are familiar with the bylaw will probably have more, but we're hoping this will kind of spur some thoughts for you guys to ask us some really difficult questions tonight. So one of the first issues, and we've talked about some of these with council as well as advisory planning commission and some of the other stakeholders. So pre-zoning. Pre-zoning is a tool where you can go in and when you're doing a zoning bylaw update, like this, you can say, we got this big undeveloped parcel and we're going to pre-zone this so they don't need to go through a rezoning process to ultimately allow for whatever form of development the community thinks is needed. Now there's some trade-offs with that. That is the time when we can do what are called amenity negotiations. So we can tell people, yeah, you can rezone, but you need to provide X amount of your units as affordable housing, for example. So there are some trade-offs, but then it allows housing, for example, to get built a lot more faster when you pre-zone it, because then someone just comes in, gets a development permit for how the look of the building is going to be, get a building permit and, work out some servicing. The engineers always think that the servicing and all that stuff is really important. So I guess they need to sign off on it too, but then they can get going a lot faster and break ground. And in Revelstoke, where we really need housing and commercial space for that matter, we got to start thinking, is this a tool that we want to implement as a community, or do we still want people to go through a formal rezoning process? Or are there some properties where maybe this is appropriate? Maybe properties that the city owns that we're going to develop for affordable housing. Maybe those make sense to pre-zone. So something to think about. Density and building height. I'll tell you right now, from a planning perspective, our densities are way too low. When you look at our medium and our high density zones as they currently sit in the bylaw, they're not medium and high density zones. They're medium and high density zones as would have been prescribed for in 1980, which is reflective of the date of our bylaw. So we're not seeing the type of housing get built in Revelstoke that we need because our baseline densities are very low, and it makes it very challenging for the development community to respond to the needs of the market right now. So we will be looking at how do you increase those baseline densities and what zones should be eligible for an increase in baseline density. And then building height as well. Building height's another big one. That's always a big sticking point that people definitely have concerns about. So we want to hear all your concerns about building height as well. Parking, another big topic. So we will be looking again at all of our parking regulations, seeing where it's suitable to reduce those parking regulations. Again, I encourage everyone, think about where we're going rather than where we're at right now. We are shifting how we get around. Doesn't mean that no one's going to have a car, but it does mean that fewer people on the whole will not have a car. And then lastly, animal agriculture. This is a topic that is definitely, it can be contentious. So we already allow for crop production everywhere. Greenhouses have some pretty relaxed regulations that allow you to put them in your front yards if you need to, get some good sun exposure. Animal agriculture is a whole other beast, but it's something that we hope to tackle with this bylaw. It's a very important part of food security. And the only form of animal agriculture that we permit right now is you can have, I think, up to 4 or 5 hens, 1 rooster. Oh, no roosters. No one better have any roosters. That's apparently not allowed. So that is something that we do want to revisit. We do want to tackle with this bylaw. And, one of the important things is not to think about it as an all or nothing. It is where can we meet in the middle and find some common sense regulations that allow us to achieve our goals as a community, but it's something that everyone can live with. So something important to keep in mind. So that's it for me. I told you guys I really like to talk. So when you guys ask some questions, we have Ms. Hartling and Ms. Komars here that will be answering the bulk of them. And I do encourage you as well, think that we do have Mr. Brooks online. And Mr. Brooks, as I indicated, is a very qualified planning consultant, and he has worked in dozens of municipalities across British Columbia. So I really encourage you to ask some questions about what are other places doing and how is that working and how could that be effective in Revelstoke? Because that is what we want to use them for, best practices. So thank you very much. And see, we have 2 questions up there right now. So you're able to actually put questions onto Slido. And on YouTube, you'll see the way to put questions into Slido in the description of YouTube. Thank you, Jay. And for those of you that are in person, if you don't want to scan the app and put stuff in there for your questions, we got the microphone at the front here that you guys are welcome to come up to. And again, ask some really good, pointed, hard questions of us. So Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. I'm just going to start with the question up at the top. With the provincial government signaling to remove the removal of R1 zone for higher density, is the city planning to follow, lead the way? And so as our preliminary discussions have gone, R1 density, single family dwelling, we're trying to build a higher density here in Revelstoke. We're trying to provide zones that allow for more flexibility within the development within them. So R1 zoning for single family dwelling will no longer, if we move forward, will no longer be existing as it is. We want to see higher density on those lots. So that's part of why we brought in accessory dwelling units for garden suites and carriage houses as well. Trying to eliminate sprawl as much as possible. So moving forward with the government, yeah, that is our intention.
Just quickly on that one, Adrian. And just quickly for those that aren't aware of what the province is trying to do right now, the province has announced that they are going to introduce legislation that will allow a minimum of 4 dwelling units on every single lot within every municipality in British Columbia. Now, it doesn't mean that tomorrow every single family home is going to be required to have 4 units, or that every single family home should be demolished to accommodate 4 units. The province has not been very specific on the details of this legislation, so the planning group is definitely eagerly waiting. But I would say that, as Ms. Komar has indicated, we are already heading in this direction, and our lowest density zone will probably allow for duplexes with secondary suites in it. So we really are already heading in that direction. And I will note, most of the zoning in Revelstoke already does allow for that, except for Columbia Park and Arrow Heights. Every property in the city allows for duplexes right now. So Revelstoke is pretty far ahead, I would say.
Does anyone in the audience have a question so far? Sounds good.
I've got a question and a comment. The first question is, since we moved here, I've seen 2 trailer parks go through rezoning or get sold, and the people that live on those trailer parks all asked to leave. There's one on 4th Street going on right now. And I'm just wondering if there will be protection for trailer parks under new zoning. So that's sort of my question. Then my comment is, we just took a reno at our house and put in a secondary suite. And the current parking regulation says we're allowed for a 2 1/4 car. And on our tenants that have moved in have a full-size car. So just wondering, just a comment that maybe, you know, there's certainly plenty of room to pile snow with 3 or even 4 car spaces on the frontage up where we live. So that would just be my request, is to maybe look at updating that so that everyone has a place to park. And I know it'll be a while before, you know, people don't have vehicles, I think, traveling out of town and such. Thanks.
Yeah, I can answer the first question with the mobile home park. So staff are currently and have drafted a mobile home park policy that is a direction from council. So it's a mobile home park redevelopment policy and also tenant protection. So it is something that the community will be seeing shortly presented to council. So that will address some of your comments there. It will be outlining what's required for when there's a development permit and what's required for when there's a rezoning application. And so it'll be better guidance for tenants, for developers, and for staff and council when we're looking at those, because there are quite a few mobile home parks in the city. It's affordable housing. So we do want to make sure that there's a transition there if there is redevelopment, and that everybody's opinions are taken into consideration.
Yeah, just another question. Comment, I think this is great. Awesome work. You guys are doing great work. Hopefully the city will be a livable place, even more livable, and when this all goes through. What are your thoughts on minimum lot size, like front yard setbacks, and that kind of stuff? Like, where do you see that going with this whole rewrite?
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna ask Kevin online if maybe he can field this question. So minimum lot size, where are we kind of going with that? Where's the direction? And also setbacks.
I can speak to the minimum lot size a little bit. And there's a lot of different options that we can explore with regards to minimum lot size. When you're talking about lower density parcels, say, your standard single detached dwelling parcel, what you see as a standard across British Columbia right now is that 450 square meter size for a minimum lot size. What you're beginning to see, especially in communities that have a restricted geography, is the discussion around maximum lot sizes. And this is a discussion that I do recommend that we have as part of this process, is contemplating this idea of maybe minimums, but also the idea of maximum lot sizes. So that when you have large land holdings, that it's not being basically sat on for future development opportunity when it could potentially provide for more affordable forms of housing for the community when it's in strategic locations that support that. So hopefully that touches and somewhat answers your question.
And then just quickly for the setbacks, we will be examining, so our setbacks are quite large right now, again, reflective of a 1980s style bylaw. Think of that old idea of a 6 meter front yard setback, white picket fence, huge rear yard with a 7.5 meter setback. What we're seeing is there's issues with people even building things like decks. And as we move forward, a couple of things we got to be aware of. We probably will increase lot coverage requirements. So you can build more on your lot with carriage suites, and everyone wants a garage to store their toys. It is Revelstoke. But we're going to have to be really cognizant of impervious lot area. So how much can actually infiltrate so that we're not flooding the roadways or flooding your neighbors. So that'll have to be something that, if you want to build more, you're going to have better stormwater management on site.
We do have a couple questions online. One of the questions is expanding city limits to involve the adjacent areas of the valley that are functionally related to the city, but currently in the regional district. So currently we have a few properties in the Thomas Brook neighborhood that are within city limits, so that those properties will get a zone that's in line with the official community plan. So the designation of those properties is for low density or resort type accommodation. So they would likely get something similar to what you see in the R2 zone for duplexes. For expanding city limits, that will not be part of this zoning bylaw rewrite. That is an annexation and a different process. And the city has done a study on that. And the official community plan currently does not support an expansion at this time. I'm not sure if Mr. Simon has anything to add.
I'm going to take the next question. Would the use of the pre-zoning reduce the potential amenities we are able to get from a property as the actual developer isn't involved at that time? Pre-zoning and asking for amenities is a way for us to leverage what can and cannot happen on the subject area. So it's a way for us to ask if this plot of land is to be developed, the expectation is for the sidewalk to be part of that development. It's a way for us to somewhat ask for the amenities that we would like to see in the community and that specific location. It kind of allows us to have a little bit more say of what can or cannot happen on the land, and allows the developer in some ways to choose whether or not that's a project or a piece of land that they would like to develop. It can set our community up to ask for things that we really need in terms of soft infrastructure, which not just hard infrastructure, which I mean by sidewalks and roads, but soft infrastructure is like mental health services, a daycare, things like that, that our community is also desperately in need of.
And just to add on to that a little bit, pre-zoning is something that allows development to happen that much faster because you don't have to go through the rezoning process. But again, it's weighing that balance of where we pre-zone and where we don't. Because once you pre-zone a property, council their authority as the land use authority to make that decision on a rezoning application, that is their opportunity to ask for some amenities. So unless we have it spelt out in other bylaws and things like frontage improvements, which is through our servicing bylaw, we do get a little bit more limited when someone doesn't have to go through a rezoning process to ask for those amenities that Ms. Komars was mentioning. So we do have to weigh that very, very seriously with this bylaw update. How much pre-zoning are we going to do and which properties should be eligible for pre-zoning? So something to very much pay attention to as this goes through the process.
Ooh, I don't quite know how to answer this one, but I'm going to read it out loud. What does rental only zoning look like? How would a neighborhood transition to this zoning type?
I would actually like to ask Mr. Brooks if he's seen any good examples of rental restricted zoning throughout the province, because I know this is a unique tool to British Columbia.
Yeah, thanks. Rental only zoning, what does it look like? It looks like any other zone, realistically. You know, you have your standard setbacks and that, but it allows you to restrict it to rental tenure only. So just like any other zone, you could provide various other conditions and provisions within the zone itself for setbacks, heights, limitations of that nature, but you can actually control tenure through the zone. It is a bit of a special power because forms of tenure in general cannot be controlled through zoning, like fee simple parcel versus say like a condominium cannot be controlled through zoning. But because of the powers of rental, you could basically say, okay, we have an area of multifamily that we want in our community. We know we need more rental in the community, and therefore you can then designate those lands for rental only construction. And then you can add your standard provisions like you would for any multifamily building, you know, height, massing, siting, and things of that nature, parking requirements and such. Lots of places have utilized rental only zoning. Of course, like most places in British Columbia, the leaders on it are Vancouver and some of the bigger centers in British Columbia at this time.
Thanks, Kevin.
Hi, Tom.
Yes, I have a rental question as well. I wanted to start by just saying that I thought the OCP program and also having Kevin Brooks here has been particularly good. And I'm very hopeful for the bylaw system to work as well. So that's a wonderful thing. The question I have is that Revelstoke is a bit unique, and I'm interested on Mr. Brooks, what he thinks about this. But we're unique in the way that we're a resort community, and we've done a lot of work with short-term rentals, and there's now bylaws and regulation around that. The observation I would make is that it's important to have long-term rental. That's why we're doing this. And my question would be that in some cases, the short-term rental bylaws have pushed owners to start with long-term rental. And there are times when those long-term rentals have many occupants and parking issues and occupancy things. So there's a long list of things. I guess where my question is going is that we tend to focus on new construction. Every bit as important is what these changes do to neighborhoods. And so I'm just curious what recommendations or ideas there are out there with other communities, best practice kind of ideas about how do you deal with that long-term rental market in a place where most of the residences are single-family dwellings and maybe have 4 bedrooms, and you know you could easily fill that up with a dozen people.
Mr. Brooks, I think that was directed at you. And yeah, I know this is a problem in many resort municipalities.
Yeah, you're coming out with all the easy questions. You know, controlling rental, like if someone is going to do long-term rentals, say within a single family home and rent out multiple rooms, and that is unbelievably challenging. Fundamentally not a zoning issue in many aspects. A lot of time it's an enforcement issue, sometimes a business licensing bylaw issue, and it really comes down to a program of controlling long-term rentals within your communities. There's a variety of ways you can do so. A lot of ways that I've seen it done, specifically in communities that have very similar issues that Revelstoke has, like that resort community and these buildings being basically rooms being rented out to numerous individuals, is basically controlling through what regulatory tools local government have. And what are those? Your business licensing bylaw is one of the strongest bylaws for that, where you require people that are renting out buildings for any purpose, long-term rentals or short-term rentals, they have to have a business license. What that allows the community to do is set conditions on that business license, and it also allows the community for enforcement purposes. That's where it comes very challenging with rentals in general, is the enforcement aspect of rentals, right? Your zoning bylaw has very limited power for controlling of tenure, like I was talking about. You can have rental zoning or normal zoning. Just because you have normal zoning, say an R1 zone that has a single family home and a suite in it, you're not controlling the actual tenure under that zone, right? So how do you then control tenure? And so it's what tools you can use. And like I said, the most effective way that I've seen it done is through business licensing, or require anybody that rents out a room and a suite go through the business licensing bylaw to then allow the community to begin enforcement for those areas that become an issue.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. I see one of the other questions on there is related to public transit. So the reduction of parking requirements is great. However, current public transit is not useful at all. It is also very expensive for the city. What is the plan? So I was lucky enough to sit in a meeting today where I heard an update from our director, Mr. Black, who has been working on addressing this very issue. So we are looking at consolidating the transit systems. Sorry, I thought he was going to get up there for a second and come answer. I guess not. So I'll do my best to paraphrase. Essentially, the city knows that there's some challenges with the existing BC transit system. The shuttle service works quite well and is usually pretty filled up, but the BC transit system generally doesn't get that much use. So we are looking at consolidating, looking at the route alignments for them and making sure that it's as effective as it could be, as well as looking at other alternative ways to fund it. So that we can make sure we have a sustainable system going into the future. And anyone that is more interested in that, because again, it's not necessarily a zoning bylaw issue. We're not dealing with public transit necessarily, but in order for the zoning bylaw to work, if we want to reduce parking requirements, we are going to be dependent on having an effective public transit system. Zoning bylaw won't regulate public transit, but it will be dependent on the public transit being effective for our zoning bylaw to work effectively. So the transportation master plan did review this, and it did come up with some options for routes. And the city is going to be working very hard at implementing those this year, I believe, before the next winter. Yes, I see Mr. Black shaking his head. Yes, we are going to see some changes by this winter. So definitely keep your ear to the ground for that. Does anyone else in the audience have any questions right now before we jump on to another one from online? Or are you guys just all using the app to throw your questions on there?
So I see a question on there about heritage zones. So are there any ideas or plans to adjust the heritage zones in bylaw? So currently our zoning bylaw doesn't have a specific heritage zone, but we are looking at updating or are updating our heritage management plan. So that is a project on Talk Revelstoke right now. So with the heritage management plan, there's action items that come out of that. And we do have a heritage commission looking at policies and a consultant working on the heritage management plan. And discussion of heritage zones is one of the action items that we are discussing. It's something that if there is any input from the community members that are within heritage zones that you can see with heritage zones having relaxation of setbacks or height, this is something that we're looking at. So if there are questions like that, we do want to hear them as we are working through the heritage management plan, which will inform the zoning bylaw rewrite as well.
The question at the top there, how will street parking for camper, trailer, sleds, flat utility, et cetera, be managed or considered in the parking and bylaw updates? Very good question. It won't So the zoning bylaw will be looking at off-street parking requirements. So any on-street parking requirements that are in the city right of way need to abide by any posted signage. And then if the city has an additional on-street parking bylaw above and beyond that. So that is where those will need to abide by. But generally speaking, the zoning bylaw is looking at off-street parking requirements on private properties. So that's where the regulations are going to be spelling out what the requirements are.
Any changes or recommendations for the social service zoning? Interesting concept. Currently, we don't really have a social servicing zoning. We have commercial-based zoning and public institutions. But that sounds like a kind of an interesting concept to bring forward. And I'm just going to put it back into the audience to think about what definitions are currently maybe missing from the zoning bylaw, which might be really helpful for social servicing that we can kind of bring into zoning. Because I'm just going to bring it. We have the definition of churches. That's our only definition currently in the zoning bylaw, but we're now in 2021, 2023, and it's places of worship. And that kind of houses lots of different kind of forms of institutionalized prayer formats. So that's just one example of how our zoning bylaw is currently out of date with definition. And that could be very similar too for social institutions. So if you have examples of definitions that you want to see for those zones, please, please, please bring them forward.
One of the things just to add on to that too, and really important to bear in mind with this project, that official community plan that we just did in July 2022 is our guiding document for this. We have to align with that OCP, and the OCP does have some provisions in there that say, I remember I was talking about those land use designations in the OCP. No, I'm sure everyone's already forgotten about that. There's some in there where they talk, commercial land use designations, mixed use, industrial, institutional uses are supported in all those land uses. So we need to make sure that that's reflective in the zones. And what you will see in the zoning bylaw is greater allowances for institutional uses that are providing support services to the community that will likely be more applicable throughout the zoning bylaw, because we need to make sure we have sufficient space for those community services. So we will be guided by the OCP with that.
So we have a question on there. What is being considered with regards to tiny homes and van people? They're here and not going away. So the zoning bylaw does look at private property land. So we'll be looking at, we already do allow for a version of a tiny home, not on wheels, so garden suites. So we are looking at smaller homes. They will need to meet BC building code. So there are different parameters that we're looking at. We do want to open it up for more tiny homes. It's just the definition of tiny home. I think what many people think a tiny home is movable on wheels compared to a tiny home on a foundation. So we will be having clear definitions, what's allowable in a zone, what's considered a permitted smaller dwelling on a parcel. We are looking at the smaller parcels downtown that are quite small. And if there's an opportunity to have a small home zone or something to have incentive to be able to build smaller homes. For the vans, that's something that is a hard topic for all municipalities. There's safety issues with that are considered. It is definitely an ongoing discussion. So it's not being heard, but we do have to follow parameters of bylaws, local government act, BC building code. So it's trying to fit in those innovative forms of housing that's also safe in the community.
I'm surprised Erica answered that one because that is a very contentious subject. So I was just going to kick it to Mr. Brooks, but I do have a question for him on here. Have you seen any municipality that has successfully instituted some type of program to allow people to reside permanently in tiny homes on wheels or camper vans?
Great question. Yes and no. So I'll cut that question in half. In camper vans, no. So basically what you're seeing is for people to permanently reside in, we'll call it a tiny home for now or a camper van, the dwelling, if we want to call it such, has to be constructed for permanent residency. And so when you start allowing people to live in RVs or camper vans, they are not constructed for permanent residency. And you look at the actual Canadian CSA standards, they're not constructed for that purpose. And so there has been a lot of challenges and issues associated with allowing our local governments trying to create zoning to allow for people to reside in RVs or camper vans on a permanent basis because they're not constructed for that purpose. And there are some liability issues that are associated with that, some case law that has come out in that regard. In regards to tiny homes, there's a lot of people doing a lot of innovative things with and around the tiny homes. And again, Erica had mentioned a little bit, a small home on a permanent foundation. A lot of people will call it a tiny home if it meets some specific criteria, which is typically quite small, right? Under 45 square meters or something like that, right? You start seeing very small units. When you look at how tiny homes are constructed, the tiny homes are constructed on a metal foundation on wheels, and they're constructed for permanent residency. They basically are a manufactured home because they have to be approved through CSA, and it's the Z240 provisions under CSA, which are the same for standard manufactured or mobile homes, as with some jurisdictions call them. So they're fundamentally regulated under those same regulations. So you see some local governments allowing this idea of tiny homes, but the actual approval for permanent residency under CSA is the same for a mobile home or some called manufactured home. And what they do is they put provisions in to try to meet a different standard for the design of the actual parcels and lots in which these are sited on. Permanent foundation tiny homes, again, like Eric said, it's a building permit issue. As long as you're meeting the building code requirements for construction purposes, the actual nature and size of the building isn't a major issue as long as ventilation requirements and fire separation and all those elements are met. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Kevin. The next question, what role/opportunities does the city have to play in covenants on title, example for local workforce ownership and or rentals? So we have our CAO, Mr. Parliament, here as well, who's sitting in the back of the room or standing in the back of the room. And since he's come here, he's been adamant about really moving the needle forward on this housing issue. As some of you have seen, anyone who was at the Housing Summit a month or so ago. So one of the big things that we are grappling with now at the city is what are the next steps to move forward to meaningfully address and manage housing in the long term. Being very honest with everyone, the capacity of the planning group right now to be overseeing the administration and enforcement of housing agreements that get registered on title via covenant, which is what the question is referring to, over the long term will not be there. So we need to start looking now at a separate entity, something like a housing corporation or a housing authority or an expansion of our existing society, something that can oversee this. We have a lot of city land. We're doing planning on it for affordable housing. The Revelstoke Community Housing Society, which we have a few people out here today from, which is excellent, is doing a great job at managing what we have. But again, it's a volunteer run society. So we need to get a game plan together for the long term of how we are going to manage this. Because if we allow garden suites, for example, and we say you're allowed to build one as long as you're renting it out to a local worker, where are the checks and balances and who's going to be responsible for enforcing that? And I will speak for the planning staff right now. There is certainly enough on our plates just with processing the applications to get this stuff built and doing these long range plans. We do need a separate entity to kind of be overseeing this stuff. So it is something that the city is looking into, and we will be obviously reporting back to the community on what the outcome of that is. But the needle is moving, and it's moving in the right direction.
Does the city have an appetite to create a program to produce pre-approved carriage garden suites similar to Nelson that follow the guidelines of section 5.7 in the zoning bylaw? Absolutely. We would love to see this. We would love to see some pre-approved designs that people can come in. They can pick one that fits maybe on their lot, their space. It can be expedited through the building permit process. I would love that. I work on all the building permits. It'd be wonderful to just kind of get that done faster. And we've kind of had internal conversations about putting forward almost like a design competition to see what that looks like. We're not quite there yet, but that's definitely a direction we want to go.
So for the builders, we're looking for some free time for you guys to come up with some cool plans under the guise of a competition. That's what we're looking for.
And free design. Exposure. How will Indigenous voices be included in this process? Which makes decisions about unceded land? Really, really good question. Needs to be asked. It's a work in progress here in Revelstoke. We do now have an Indigenous liaison, Dale Toma. He works at the Economic Development Office. We need to continue to engage with him on what that looks like in the direction that this goes within the zoning bylaw. Is the preservation of the downtown core a high priority? Yeah, maintaining our main street and our viable businesses down there, for sure. It's part of the reason why we all live here.
Just one thing on that note, something to be aware of with this project. There's a few key issues that might warrant their own projects in and of themselves as we delve into this. One of them being short-term rental. So ask all your hard short-term rental questions today, and we're just going to say, that'll be dealt with through a separate project. Come back then. But the second one is the downtown area. We do have it in our OCP, and it is in our budget over the next few years to do a comprehensive downtown plan. The downtown is too important to not look at it in and of itself. And the way that staff envision it is with this zoning bylaw update, there might be some tweaks to what we call the C1, C2 zone, but we need a downtown plan to more directly inform us of how the zones need to be drafted. And more importantly, or just as importantly, the development permit area guidelines that cover the form and character of the downtown area. So staff do feel that the downtown is too important and it probably should warrant its own project. So what you'll probably see at the conclusion of this project or before the conclusion of this project is initiation of a downtown plan. And once that downtown plan is complete, it will inform zoning bylaw amendments as well as official community plan amendments. So we have a really comprehensive package that's informed by the community. And I know, crazy idea, but we actually put it into bylaw format so that staff can follow it and the community can see, oh, we requested this, it was put into bylaw, now it's being built in accordance with what we've requested and provided feedback on. So it is a very important piece, and we think it's important enough that it warrants its own project.
Just before we go to more online questions, is there anyone in the audience that has a question for staff? Just to give you all a chance. Did you want to come up to the mic?
I'm just wondering if there's been any discussion so far as to how to proceed with the future growth land. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. So the old OCP had all these lands identified as future growth, and some of them now have been assigned a proper land use designation under the OCP. But one of the challenges that we're actually finding right now is, especially in the Arrow Heights area, we have all these large vacant parcels that are zoned R1. And what we've heard loud and clear from the community through the OCP process was quit chopping up these large vacant parcels for single family homes that are being sold for $500,000 a piece just for the land, plus another $1.5 million to build these really large houses on. We have enough of that in Revelstoke. We got to start being more smart and efficient with our land. So Mr. Brooks had touched upon it earlier. You can do things like maximum lot sizes to try and put the zoning in a way that people are not building these huge homes on what would be previously classified as the future growth lands. Another way to do it is we could zone them, essentially it's down zoning. You could give them something like an urban reserve zone and then force that proponent to go through a rezoning process in alignment with the official community plan to develop in a way that the community has indicated this is our desired future land use. So we do have a couple tools on how to manage growth on those lands, but it is a very important topic we have to look at, because if we are short-sighted and we allow quarter acre lots to keep springing up everywhere, we are going to run out of land soon. And that premise in the OCP of let's not expand our boundaries, let's grow smart, let's go up, let's not go out and extend services is going to be a challenging one to keep. Mr. Brooks, do you have any other comments or ideas on how we deal with large vacant parcels and future growth lands?
No, you captured it, but one of the things I would elaborate on, and it's something that was spoken about earlier, is the concept of pre-zoning. It's something that we've talked about as a team where, there's lands that um, there's lands that you really want to incentivize densification and development on. And so that idea of selective pre-zoning, but there's also lands you do not want to see cut up in a particular manner because it will detract from the long-term growth of the community, right? And so those are the ones that you certainly don't want to pre-zone, and you want to make it that people need to come and talk to council and the community before they do something on those lands, right? And so that, again, it's strategies that you can use through your zoning bylaw to incentivize key development in certain areas of your community and disincentivize certain forms of development in other areas.
So you have a question on here. What's possible changes will be revised bylaw have with regard to BC's new action plan for increased housing units for R1 and R2 lots? I think we had a similar question to this. So I mean, Revelstoke wants to be ahead. We're already working towards this before this has even come out. So for increased housing units for R1, R2 lots, we have updated this with the secondary suites within duplexes, row houses, carriage houses, garden suites as accessory dwelling units. We are looking at potentially increased densities in these zones. There's discussion of 3 units, I know, with the province. So these are things that we are looking at, and we do want to keep up or be ahead of these mandates.
Next question. Is there going to be a section in the bylaw that gives the development of low carbon structures any development benefits? Similar to Squamish and Vancouver, Step Code 3 was brought into actualization actually like this week. So all new buildings and new structures should be developed at that level. If you want to go up, Step Code 4, Step Code 5. And those are kind of like the baseline level of construction at this time to move us forward for more ecological design. I think that's kind of where this is going, but yeah, density bonusing. Yeah. I'll let you take this one.
So one of the things you can do is you can say you're allowed X amount of density on a property. However, if you meet certain provisions, you can up your density. And one of those things could be if you achieve a certain level of energy efficiency with your build. So staff will be looking at that. The big one that we want to focus on is if you get extra density, we want you to provide amenities in the form of affordable housing. That is the most dire need of the community right now. And as Ms. Comar's indicated, Step Code is really starting to take care of the question of energy efficiency by making it a baseline requirement. So as a community, that's something that's also important to keep an eye out for when we do this bylaw update is what conditions need to be met in order for someone to be eligible for density bonusing. If we're going to give a developer extra density, what amenities does the community want to see within the legislative framework that ultimately allows for that density to be realized? So certainly something to keep your eye out for, but right now our focus is predominantly affordable housing. This one's interesting. Mentioned in February 2021 on Revelstoke Review, Revelstoke Community Housing Society is adopting a microhome pilot project. How does that affect the zoning bylaw? When is it starting and where? So I believe the RCHS is going to be, or one of their partners is going to be looking at this again. Staff have been in discussion with them. A microhome pilot project, again, we kind of talked about the BC building code requirements they need to meet, so we won't go down that again. But from a zoning perspective, it's pretty basic. You have a smaller minimum lot size, you do something where it's stratified and you're on your way. One of the really interesting things that we're really excited about here and that we want to present to the community and council is Revelstoke. If anyone's ever looked at a map of it, we have all these really weird 25-foot lots scattered throughout the downtown area, central Revelstoke, the heritage area. And sometimes they fall between properties and they're not developed on. And you see a couple of these really cool, narrow single family homes that have been constructed on these 25-foot lots, which is only about 7 meters wide. And just, generally speaking, you need at least a 15-meter wide lot to build a house on. So one of the things we've talked about doing is you could pre-zone those lots to allow them all to be build ready. So someone can come in for a building permit, not need variances for setbacks and lot coverage, and start seeing more of these 25-foot lots that were drawn on some CP plan back in 1890 that everyone thinks are a problem today and cumbersome, actually using it to our advantage and starting to see some thoughtful infill that would be spread out throughout the community. So that's one of the things we want to look at. So definitely keep your ear to the ground. And the reason I equate that to this is, it would essentially be a small lot zone. And that small lot zone could then be applied for through a rezoning process to be replicated elsewhere and potentially be looked at as a micro home option. But we're really excited about that. That's the stuff that gets us really excited. I don't see anyone else overly excited about it.
With the rezoning, if a particular neighborhood collectively would like to have STR, short-term rental zoning, is that something that the city would be willing to consider? Currently, we're mandated by council to look for long-term housing options, housing for residents who live and work here. So short-term rental pre-zoning is not something that we have discussed further. It's not something that we're currently on the table to be looking at investigating further. So no, I don't think that is something that's going to be moving forward.
And we kind of touched upon it earlier, the short-term rental issue. I've never seen such a polarizing issue in my life in a resort municipality. Usually you can find somewhere in the middle. Okay, we don't want 50 units on a property. The developer wants 50, the community wants 30, you meet in the middle at 40. This is something where both ends of the spectrum, it's hard to get everyone to come together. So we really do view it as something that probably is going to need to be its own project to tackle short-term rental regulations. Someone can always submit a rezoning application right now. Staff are following, as Ms. Comar's indicated, council approved policy that says we don't support any more rezoning for short-term rental. Council can approve it if they want, so it can always be submitted. Staff will process your application and bring it forward. We'll tell you right off the bat, this policy, we can't support it. However, we will get you through the process. One thing I encourage everyone to do who's listening today, we are going to have to revisit this issue. As a community, we need to come together and sort out what is our philosophy on short-term rentals. What do we want to achieve? Is it preservation of long-term rental at all costs? And if so, how are we going to enforce that? And what are the costs associated with that? And there are challenges with that, a lot of challenges we can tell you. Or do we want it to be a way for locals to engage in the tourism economy? And if it's the latter, then what are the pros and cons of doing that? What's it going to do to the cost of housing right now when someone can make X amount of money, even if it supports them with the increased cost of living that we're all seeing right now? What is the impact of that going to be? And you're never going to come up with something perfect, but we need to come together as a community and sort out what is our philosophy on this issue. Because as staff, if we haven't sorted that out, how are we ever going to be able to craft effective regulations that are trying to achieve everything? And in the end, you don't really achieve anything. So very important to think about. So the short-term rental issue, it is likely one that's probably going to have to be pulled out of this comprehensive bylaw update because it is so involved in and of itself. And it's something that if we wrap it into this comprehensive update, similar to the downtown discussion, it's such a big talk for the whole community to get involved with that it almost doesn't do it justice to wrap it up in something as big as this zoning bylaw project right now. It's hard for everyone to come to the table and be like, oh, you're increasing density, you're reducing parking regulations, animal agriculture too. And now you want to throw short-term rental and how our downtown's going to look over the next 20 years into the mix. That's a lot of stuff for us to consider with this update. Not to mention, I wouldn't want to be on council having to adopt that bylaw in the end. That's a lot for them.
We have a question online. Will there be a resolution process if a property owner disagrees with their property's new zoning? So before the bylaw even is presented to council, there will be opportunities for community members to, when we are going out to the neighborhoods, coffee chats, can write in, but there will be a formal public hearing process. So that is once the bylaw is drafted and ready for council, if there is still concerns with certain zones, and that is when the public can come out and provide written concerns or issues with the zone that they're in or around them for council consideration.
Another thing on that too, the coffee chats will be really important for everyone to come out, voice their feedback. And the secret reason why we have Mr. Brooks on this call, because he's done, I don't know how many dozens of these bylaws, and he has a 100% perfect track record of making sure everyone is 100% satisfied at the conclusion of the project. So that is the main reason why we've brought him on as well.
That's not true.
On that note, there's a question for Kevin Brooks. What will the revised bylaw see as a permanent foundation?
So, in regards to tiny homes, is that the question, like, for permanent foundation, like under a building? Just for clarity.
Okay, yeah, it's in relation to tiny homes.
So permanent foundations are typically actually defined under a building code. And so there's different things that can be defined in permanent foundation. And I'm certainly not a building code expert, so I'd rely on building officials. But typically, permanent foundation, there's a variety of what can be construed as permanent foundations. You know, a poured concrete foundation, of course, is a permanent foundation. I believe screw piles and things of that nature are deemed a permanent foundation in a lot of instances. So again, you'd have to rely on building code for what would be construed as permanent foundation. If you look at like a manufactured home, they are built on a steel frame with wheels attached that are then removed when they're placed on a property, and therefore, in most cases, those aren't actually on a permanent foundation. So there's a fundamental difference between those two things.
Thanks, Kevin. What dictates affordable houses? Oh, sorry. What dictates affordable houses zoning bylaws? How does it work? Is there a set plan, 15 to 30 years for the future? And where can we access this plan, map, and details? Currently, it's in the Housing Action Plan, which came out last year. I'd really recommend everyone that's here, you seem like you're on the pulse a bit, to take a little bit of a read. I actually cried when I read it. It hit me quite hard, hit my heart. That's kind of dictating what affordable rent is considered in our community based on how much income is coming forward. There is a plan. There are actions associated with it, which are connected to the official community plan. They work tandemly, the official community plan and the housing action plan. And there's a lot of details in that plan. So I do suggest for maybe you all to take a bit of a read, and then kind of how that would impact the zoning bylaw. We've been talking about it quite extensively, thinking about long-term rental units. How would that look within the zoning bylaw? Eliminating the R1 zone for single family dwelling, creating opportunities for only duplexes, accessory dwelling units, and so forth. So yeah, please take a read of the Housing Action Plan.
And one thing to add on to that, and I'd like Mr. Brooks to add on to my comments if he sees fit. One important thing to consider, the city has some land that we are going to be doing some master planning on, the Oscar Street, Bridge Creek properties, for the purposes of affordable housing. But really important, affordable housing should be dispersed throughout the community. We shouldn't have it isolated in this part of town or that part of town. And even within our areas that have a lot of affordable housing development, you typically want to see a mixture of market and non-market housing. We want to move away, and Revelstoke is already pretty good in this regard. Gated communities and this idea of only this area can accommodate single family and it's its own little slice over there that everyone loves. You got to start integrating and diversifying the housing throughout the community. And you would love to have a mix of non-market housing dispersed throughout the community so that people are integrated and that we're breaking down some of those social structures that may exist right now. I don't know if Mr. Brooks has anything else to add about how you appropriately disperse affordable housing throughout the community.
I agree with your comments. It should be dispersed throughout the community. There really should be a community approach and a community plan in place on how affordable housing is actually allocated throughout your community. And that should be part of an overall discussion on the goals and the objectives of the community for provision of affordable housing. And you also have to look at, when we speak to affordable housing and we're speaking about dispersing affordable housing throughout a community, there is a broad range of what affordable housing is. And so that needs to be very, very clear when you have a conversation of affordable housing. You can have affordable rental housing that, majority of normal people need in this day and age. Well, that's different than non-market rental housing to get people off the street, right? And so there's a broad range of affordable, and there should be a concerted effort done by any community to identify the needs for each of the forms of affordable housing, whether it's non-market or pulling people off the street to market affordable housing. And so there's a strategy should be put in place to identify your needs and then how to integrate that into the various neighborhoods within your community.
So will tonight's questions be available online for further consideration by the community? I believe from the housing action, we compiled them all, provided answers, and then where do we provide them on Talk Revelstoke? Okay. They will be provided on Talk Revelstoke, and there'll be answers to all of the online questions as I'm trying to madly capture and answer all these questions with my notes. For another question, keeps changing. How will the city address concerns with land value if zoning changes and the landowner feels like the value has been negatively impacted? It is very hard to imagine a negative impact on the land value, but currently, the zoning changes really are to, it's really hard to regulate the market value of land. Local government tries to capture all community needs. So we'll be looking at zoning that will bring a positive impact to the community as a whole. And land values is not something that, I mean, Mr. Simon might want to jump in on here, but it's not something that the zoning bylaw will be regulating. We'll be looking at opening up densities, so there'll be development opportunities. But for the whole market value of Revelstoke, it is a very, very challenging thing to regulate land value.
Yeah, I think that this question may be spurred from my previous comment about potentially downzoning properties. So again, if you're downzoning a property, the intent isn't to say you're never allowed to develop on it. The intent is to say there is a process that you can go through, the rezoning process, to assign a new zone to your property that aligns with our official community plan so that you're going to develop in a way that is for the betterment of the community and reflects the needs of the community, specifically with respect to housing, rather than the old chop everything up into quarter-acre lots, throw down a road with some sewer and some water pipe, and sell it for $500,000 a piece. We have gone down that road, and what we heard loud and clear from the OCP process is that that is not the road that we want to keep going down in the community. So if someone does feel that their land value is impacted, I do encourage them to reach out to Mr. Black, and he will be happy to discuss that with you.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. Could an affordable housing requirement be included in future RMR Mackenzie Village development? So currently the Mackenzie Village development, it was pre-agreed upon before any of the three planning staff that you see in front of you sitting here had an impact on. So a lot of those agreements are already in place. They're pretty solid, and I do not foresee there being changes to them moving forward. And with RMR, those lands are currently not designated per se for affordable housing, but perhaps, but really, I feel like I'm digging myself into a hole right now. Pass this one forward.
Yeah, so those two properties, they're comprehensive development zones, have very specific allocations within them. Mackenzie Village is governed by our zoning bylaw. There's also agreements there. Revelstoke Mountain Resort has provincial regulations, local government regulations. And so with rezoning, if there ever is a rezoning application, you can open up those CD zones potentially, but as they stand currently, they're very specific to what they allow. Revelstoke Mountain Resort is building forms of staff housing and resort housing. Mackenzie Village has different forms of housing and amenities coming in, but if there are a potential for affordable housing options, that may be something through a potential future rezoning or looking at neighborhood plans.
Nicely saved, Erica. Thank you. Moving forward with higher densities, mixed.
I add that at RMR, at build out, 10% of the build out volume is required through the contract with the province to be staff workforce housing. There's a contract between the Crown and the developer as part of their license to operate.
Thank you, Jason. Our development caps, especially comprehensive development zones, planned for each new zone. So currently Revelstoke has over 20 comprehensive development zones, which is incredibly large for how small of a city that we actually are. We're hoping to not create any more of those. With this rezoning rewrite, with the zoning rewrite, we are hoping to actually condense some of them and or condense the zones that are currently happening. So creating specialized specific zones for parcels of land is something that we're really trying to move away from in our zoning bylaw. We're trying to create more flexibility within the zones that we're going to be rewriting to allow for more opportunity with commercial, as well as more opportunity with housing variety and housing stocks that like differentiation.
Thanks, Adrian. And yeah, those existing CD zones, they already have some density restrictions in them that say how much you can build. So what we will be looking at doing though, we have a bunch that are not needed anymore. They're old CD zones. So we're hoping that we can turn them into a standard zone within the bylaw and not have so many CD zones. But no, we're not going to be looking at opening up the development rights that were already entrenched in those CD zones. That's just going to really muddy the waters too much. Moving forward with higher densities, mixed uses and government mandates, et cetera, is the preservation of historical neighborhoods a high priority? That is an interesting question because the concept of historical neighborhoods can be very subjective depending on your view of what constitutes something to be historical. I live in a neighborhood where a lot of the houses were built in 1950. It's pretty historical to me. But no, generally speaking, Ms. Hartling already kind of touched upon it. We're doing a heritage management plan and we really need to examine our current boundaries of the heritage conservation area, the heritage station conservation area. And if we need to apply a specific zone to those properties to try and make sure that those heritage features are preserved, then by all means, we will be doing that. And one of the important things is when you see higher density development going into historic neighborhoods or neighborhoods that have a little bit more longevity to them, you need a development permit for forming character. Those forming character development permits, whenever you hear forming character, it's just the look of the buildings. It's intended to make sure that that building integrates well into its surrounding development context. So if staff are doing their jobs right, if we have a council that's approving really good development permit area guidelines, which we all know ours need to be updated, and that is another project that will be in the works soon, then we're going to have really robust guidelines to make sure that as higher density development is going into what's traditionally single detached neighborhoods, it'll be integrated really well and it's not going to detract from that existing historical character of it. Oh, there's an interesting question about the sewage system.
Yeah, I have a question about statutory building schemes. Because I could see that there's like lots of areas that have been developed with these statutory building schemes dictating like only single family only or a minimum of this or a maximum of that kind of stuff. How does that play into like the redevelopment and rezoning process? Because they are possibly an impediment, right?
We love the building schemes. They're excellent. We're always asked to enforce them as the municipality. So for everyone listening, we don't enforce building schemes. We enforce the zoning bylaw. And building schemes are put on there by the developer. So the city really doesn't have too much involvement in drafting or enforcing building schemes. I will ask Mr. Brooks, though, if he's ever seen a municipality, because we haven't heard from him. So he's getting off the hook easy right now over the last 4 questions or so. Have you ever seen a municipality that gets quite involved in enforcing building schemes or involved in the drafting of them?
No, that's what development permit guidelines are for. If a local government wants to address building schemes in general, they'll create area specific development permit guidelines, and that's how local government address that. The only time I've seen it happen is when a covenant is buried within a building scheme, like a 219 and that, and I've seen that happen before where a building scheme is drafted that has a restrictive covenant associated with it, that the local government will get involved to administer that component of a pseudo building scheme. It's actually an embedded covenant. I've seen that happen before, but building schemes themselves, absolutely not.
I guess I could sort of just see them as like an impediment to some of the things that you're bringing in. And I don't know if there's any like recourse that the city has to like remove them or anything like that.
If I may, Paul, one of the thoughts that I did have is a developer doesn't have any authority to register a building scheme that is contrary to a bylaw. So, there may be existing building schemes, but no new building scheme could be registered contrary to the zoning bylaw that actually regulates that use of land. So for example, if say there's we were talking about maximum lot size or a density requirement on a particular lot that was established for some other provision by the city, the actual building scheme itself registered by the developer could not contravene that, because what the city is doing is a regulatory requirement of an authority provided by the province, where the building scheme is a desire and a contractual agreement between a developer and who uses that land.
Thanks, Kevin. This one, the current sewage system suitable for higher density in all neighborhoods. So just given the land base we have, you're probably not going to see huge apartment buildings creep up absolutely everywhere, but we do have a liquid waste management plan, and that liquid waste management plan does have provisions for dealing with the population increase and the associated development that comes along with that. That is envisioned. So as a planner, I say, yes, 100%, we have the capacity. But that being said, I'm not an engineer who has to be the one to deal with it. And the engineers, they usually butt heads with planners, but we really like our engineer, Mr. Black here, because he likes the planners very much, because we say, here's how things are going to develop. Now figure out how to service it. And we're lucky to have a very good engineering team that is very good at figuring it out. And he is coming up to answer that in a little bit better detail.
I think Paul's looking for a raise. So we did recently complete a water master plan and a sewer master plan. That's the liquid waste management plan. Those were both based upon growth projected in the OCP for the next 20 years. And so assuming that in 20 years, we're going to add that growth scenario outlined in the OCP, we have capacity in both the water systems and the sewer systems with our master planning and capital projects funding at this time. So we should be good.
Can you stay up there for the next one?
You may have more to add to this, Steve. Will the city collaborate with developers to create missing middle units without requiring the developer to pay for sidewalks, lighting that should already be existing? So with the zoning bylaw, we're not getting too much into frontage improvements, but these are related. So when someone is going through a development like a subdivision or building, there tends to be some frontage improvement requirements from engineering for sidewalks. If say someone's wanting to build 4 additional lots, then our transportation master plan indicates a sidewalk in the area, certain services. So these are development costs that, oh, he's walking away now. Come back.
So interesting question. We just recently also adopted a transportation master plan, which outlined the direction that the community wants to go in the long term to not build more roads. So in order to get people to get out of cars, we need to provide mechanisms for everybody to walk, active transportation, cycle, get on the bus. We don't currently have a very good sidewalk or trail network. And so in order for us to achieve that goal, we also need to build sidewalks and trails. So they go hand in hand. So to eliminate one component for another is a balancing act that the city will have to address over time and understand what that looks like. This will also come in with revisions to the development cost charges, which now that we know what our water system and sewer systems look like and our road plan, transportation plan looks like, we can now update our DCCs. And so those will be more appropriate to achieve that goal also. So a lot of things have come together in the last year or so in order to really drive the community in a place that the city and the residents have told us we want to go. And so these are real important tools for us now to follow what the city and this community has said. This is where we want to go. We have to now implement that.
Great, thank you.
I think that my question kind of feeds a little bit on what Steve was just saying, but with respect to more density and, you know, an emphasis on more active transportation, is there a consideration to new commercial zones in the neighborhoods and corridors that are more accessible on foot?
Yeah, that's definitely something that we are looking at when we're looking at rewriting the zones. We are hearing pretty loud and clear that integrating commercial within residential is being requested from the community as well as our business community here. I work on a lot of the business licenses, and there just isn't the spaces that they need to be able to incubate the businesses that they would like to bring forward into Revelstoke. So we are hearing that. And that will also feed into the transportation master plan and exactly that, allowing people to walk within their community to be able to access the amenities that they're looking for.
So most of our neighborhoods, those kind of be dealt with on entirely using something to address certain problems.
So we do still need to follow the official community plan bylaw. So we have had a lot of community feedback on where they want to see commercial nodes built out along corridors, along 4th Street, around the Southside Market. There's certain nodes that are definitely more appropriate for some commercial build out. Maybe it is more in line with the home businesses, that definition being a bit more broader, capturing maybe a few types of businesses that might be appropriate in the bottom of like a townhome development. So that's something that we do need to stay in line with our official community plan designations. And if it is something that we need to update the official community plan, then that is something that would be more of a public process to review.
Oh, great. If an area requires a zoning amendment that is not indicated within the document, example, section 11, hold on Crown land, what is the process? I'm probably going to pass this one to Erica, the queen of Crown land.
I guess I'm trying to understand this question a bit. So zoning amendment that is not indicated within the document. Example, section 11, hold on Crown land, what is the process? If it's within the city, there should be zoning on it. I'm not sure if they're implying Crown land outside the city to be. If anyone in the audience has an idea, or if you wrote this question, do you have anything to elaborate on?
Section 11.
Yeah, we would be looking at the title and any Crown land tenure with the rezoning. And if it needs to be removed, it's something that would go through with the province. It sounds like a very specific property this person's looking at. So please write into our department. You can write into zoning, email? Zoning bylaw at revelstoke.ca, and we'd be happy to answer that question more clearly.
So you mentioned looking at the short-term rental issue again. Yes, we did. Shouldn't have mentioned that. Was the previous policy considered an interim approach? Someone out there is really clever because they saw somewhere in the policy, they obviously read it, that said, we're going to revisit this within 18 months. And if anyone's counting, those 18 months started April 2022, and I can't believe that 12 have already gone by. So we are going to be looking at it again come this fall. We will probably have a little bit of overlapping work with this project, but again, we're probably going to be looking at it as its own separate thing. It was considered an interim approach. You know, anyone that was following the short-term rental process, it was a challenging process to get through. We had a bylaw that was going to allow it everywhere with a permanent resident on-site operator. That went to council. That was ultimately not supported after the public hearing. Staff went back, revised that bylaw in quick order and got it back out to say, let's start with that approach in a very isolated area. Those 59 properties adjacent to Hay Road, allow the short-term rental in the downtown area a little bit, but no more. And we're going to look at it for 18 months. We're going to try and better understand how this concept of a permanent resident on-site operator, just to break that down a little bit more, you live upstairs while you rent out your suite, or you live in your suite while you rent out upstairs. That was the general idea. Let's figure out, let's get some numbers and sort out whether or not that's something that's appropriate to be expanded or looked at further before we go down the road of expanding it everywhere in the community. So this kind of gets back to, yeah, I would love to not have to address this issue again. And I'm sure the other planners would be on the same page about that, but it's too important of an issue to not get right. And getting it right means constantly evaluating where you're at and amending as necessary to reflect the needs of the community. So we will be revisiting it again.
I might need some clarification of what this question is. I'm sorry. Can MWS, I don't know what that entity is, take care? Okay, thank you. Can Monashee Wilderness Society take care of West Side Road land? There's some underhoused people or squatters leaving a mess. We can have support of Revy Riders providing no trace community programs, a lift to section 17. I think this is a very poignant or specific question. Maybe it can be taken offline and addressed more in an email format to have a better understanding of what is going on there. Does that sound appropriate? Yeah. And then the last question we have up here is, will the new zoning bylaws prevent another Mackenzie Village in a different neighborhood? Well, the new zoning bylaws are going to have they're going to have some pretty great standards in them that are going to be a mixed use of housing and commercial. We've talked a lot about where we're going currently with short-term rentals. So unbridled short-term rentals, I don't think is something that we're going to continue to see here in Revelstoke with development moving forward. We're mandated by council right now to really think about long-term housing for residents. So that's kind of where we're going with the designations and the designs of these zones. But Mackenzie Village does have commercial at ground floor. We do see that as a really great opportunity for community, for bringing in amenities. Mackenzie Village is a bit of a higher density. We also see that as a great opportunity. But with those unbridled short-term rentals, I don't think that's a direction that our team and our current direction from council will be headed. So.
And just to add on to it a little bit, so the Mackenzie Village project, and we have a development that's permitted short-term rentals through a mixed-use development with condo-style development. That's what it is in the end. It's guided through the official community plan. So anytime someone comes through and wants to rezone, they have to align with the official community plan. So the official community plan, if someone wants to look at it from enabling and facilitating something or preventing something, conversely, it's the OCP that ultimately does that. So the zoning bylaw, what it's going to do is we're going to have a whole list of zones in that bylaw that align with the official community plan that developers can then choose from. A developer can always come in and say, your zones still don't suit what I want to do. And I like what they did over in that development that has a lot of short-term rentals, and I want to propose to do it. Staff would then look at our official community plan. We would look at any other bylaws and policies that are applicable and say whether or not it aligns with those policies. And then council is the final decision maker as to whether or not to support that rezoning. But it is the OCP, which thankfully was recently updated to have a better reflection of what the community desires, that would ultimately dictate whether or not staff would be supporting a rezoning application for something of that nature. And right now, the OCP would say, no, we're not going to support something that is just pure short-term rentals, plain and simple. With that, I see we're at the end. So it's great. I think that means we don't have to respond to any of the questions and we can just direct people to watch the video, which is excellent for us. No, we can definitely answer some of the questions. And again, if anyone has anything further, email zoningbylaw@revelstoke.ca. And I see we still got 11 minutes. So I guess we're not able to cut out yet if you guys do have more questions. But if there is anyone in the room that has any questions right now that we haven't answered, please come up now. And if you want to call us after, or if you want to email us after, that's always an option. But please do go take that survey on Talk Revelstoke. We have one council member who made it through the whole thing, and he can tell you. Oh, sorry, we have two. Oh, I didn't see Councillor Stapenhurst there. I didn't see you were blocked in the back. I know you came in at 4 o'clock too. You were here early. Sorry. But council is really keen to make sure that the community is providing feedback on these projects, right? So it's really important for staff to be enabling and facilitating that, which means we need all the community members to speak to their networks and to get people engaged in these projects. It's very, very important. The more you guys engage, this is a small town. It's not hard to listen to what you guys are saying and to try and reflect it in bylaw or to respond to you and say, hey, the legislation says we can't do that. It's very easy. So your feedback will be heard. So please engage. But yeah, if no one has any other questions, I'd like to thank Mr. Brooks for tuning in with us from the island. Kevin, do you have any final words before we wrap up here?
No, thank you all. I think a really great initial conversation, and I look forward to going through this process, having more conversations with the community.
Thank you, Kevin.
And we do thank everyone for showing up, because again, when it was a couple minutes to and there was only one person in here, we were getting a little nervous about that. It's not good when staff outnumber the members of the public that show up. So thank you again. If there's no more questions, then please take some cookies on your way out, and please be engaged with the project.